Sometimes the most powerful person in the room is not the one everyone notices. It is the one nobody understands. The laughter started almost instantly. It rolled across the ballroom like a wave, bouncing between crystal chandeliers and polished glass walls overlooking downtown Seattle. Hundreds of guests filled the annual Reed Global Charity Gala. Business leaders, investors, community organizers, and local media personalities moved through the elegant venue carrying sparkling drinks and exchanging polished conversations. At the center of it all stood Madison Reed. At 35, she had become one of the most respected CEOs in the Pacific Northwest. Confident, intelligent, and effortlessly composed, she had a reputation for controlling every room she entered. Tonight was no different. Wearing an elegant white evening dress, she stood on a small stage thanking sponsors for supporting the children's education initiative her company had funded. The crowd applauded warmly. Then her eyes landed on a familiar face near the back of the room. Daniel Carter. Unlike most attendees, Daniel looked completely out of place among the luxury suits and designer gowns. The 40-year-old single father wore a simple navy blazer that had clearly seen better days. He stood beside his 10-year-old daughter, Harper, who looked far more interested in the dessert table than the speeches. Daniel had been invited because he volunteered at one of the community programs Reed Global supported. Most people barely noticed him. Madison noticed everyone, especially him. Over the past year, she had crossed paths with Daniel several times at charity events and school programs. He was always polite, always helpful, always leaving before anyone could thank him properly. Tonight, feeling unusually relaxed, Madison smiled and decided to have a little fun. "Before we continue," she said into the microphone, her eyes locked on Daniel, "I have a question." The audience chuckled. Daniel immediately looked suspicious. Harper grinned. She knew that look on his face. "Daniel Carter," Madison continued, "when was your last date?" The room erupted. Laughter echoed everywhere. Several guests turned toward Daniel. Even Harper covered her mouth to hide a smile. Daniel rubbed the back of his neck and shook his head. "That is not a fair question." More laughter followed. Madison smiled. "Why not?" "Because I walked into this event expecting dinner, not an interrogation." The audience laughed again. Madison leaned slightly forward. "Come on. Everyone wants to know." Daniel glanced at Harper. His daughter was laughing harder than anyone. "Thanks for the support," he told her. "You are welcome," Harper replied proudly. The crowd loved it. Madison folded her arms. "Well," Daniel looked around the room. Hundreds of eyes waited for his answer. He could have made a joke. He could have changed the subject. Instead, his expression softened. The smile faded. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm and sincere. "The last time I seriously thought about dating," he said, "I realized every free hour I had belonged to someone more important." He looked down at Harper. The room grew quieter. "And honestly," he continued, "I never regretted that choice for a single day." The laughter disappeared. Conversation stopped. Even the servers carrying trays through the ballroom seemed to slow down. Madison's smile faded completely. For the first time that evening, she did not have a clever response. She simply stared at him, because beneath the simple answer was something she had not expected to hear. Not sadness, not bitterness, just love. And somehow that left her completely speechless. For the rest of the evening, people talked about Daniel Carter's answer. Some mentioned it while waiting for dessert. Others whispered about it near the ballroom doors. A few guests even repeated it on their way to the parking garage. Yet the person who seemed least interested in the attention was Daniel himself. Less than 10 minutes after the conversation ended, he was helping event staff stack chairs near the back of the room while Harper sampled miniature cheesecakes from the dessert table. That was Daniel's way. Whenever attention found him, he quietly stepped away from it. The charity gala eventually came to an end. Guests collected coats. Valet attendants brought cars around the circular entrance. Seattle's cool evening air drifted through the open doors as people headed home. Daniel and Harper walked toward an aging silver pickup truck parked several blocks away. The city lights reflected off rain-soaked sidewalks from an earlier afternoon shower. Harper carried a small gift bag filled with donated books she had won during a raffle. "Dad." "Yes." "You broke the CEO." Daniel laughed. "I did not break anybody." She looked shocked. "That is because she asked a dangerous question." Harper grinned. "And you gave a dangerous answer." Daniel shook his head. "I gave an honest answer." They climbed into the truck. As the engine started, Soft music filled the cab. Harper stared out the window for a moment. Do you ever wish things were different? Daniel glanced at her. Different how? Like having more free time. I have free time. Harper laughed. Dad. Okay. Maybe not much. She smiled. You know what I mean. Daniel drove quietly through downtown streets glowing beneath rows of streetlights. The city seemed peaceful at night. Harper, he finally said, when your mom passed away, I had a choice. The smile faded slightly from her face. They did not discuss Emily Carter often, but they never avoided her either. What choice? Daniel tightened his hands slightly on the steering wheel. I could spend my life looking at everything I lost. He paused. Or I could focus on everything I still had. Harper looked down. She already knew the answer. Me? Daniel smiled. You? Neither spoke for a while after that. Back at their modest house in a quiet Seattle neighborhood, the evening routine felt familiar. Homework was checked. Lunches were prepared for the next day. A science project waited on the kitchen table. Daniel repaired a loose cabinet hinge before taking out the trash. Nothing about his life looked extraordinary from the outside. No luxury penthouse. No executive assistants. No headlines. Just responsibility. Just consistency. Just love expressed through 1,000 small actions nobody noticed. Across the city, however, Madison Reed sat alone in her high-rise apartment overlooking Elliott Bay. The lights of Seattle stretched endlessly beyond the glass. A half-finished cup of tea rested beside her. Important emails remained unanswered. Business reports sat untouched. For the first time in years, her mind was not focused on work. It was focused on a single father who had answered a joke with the kind of truth that refused to leave her thoughts. Madison Reed had built her career on making decisions quickly. She could evaluate a business proposal in 10 minutes. She could identify weaknesses in a contract before most executives finished reading the first page. She could walk into a boardroom filled with experienced investors and leave with unanimous approval. Yet 3 days after the charity gala, she still could not stop thinking about one simple answer from a man who owned an aging pickup truck and spent his weekends volunteering. Monday morning arrived with its usual demands. Meetings filled her calendar from sunrise until late afternoon. Market reports waited on her desk. Department heads requested approvals. A major expansion project required her signature. Normally, this rhythm energized her. Today it felt strangely distant. During a strategy meeting on the 34th floor of Reed Global Headquarters, Madison found herself staring through the glass wall overlooking Seattle instead of listening to a discussion about quarterly forecasts. Madison, one executive asked. She blinked. Sorry. Continue. The meeting moved on, but her concentration did not return. Somewhere in the back of her mind, she kept hearing Daniel's voice. I never regretted that choice for a single day. Most people said things like that because they wanted admiration. Daniel had said it because he believed it. There was a difference. Later that afternoon, Madison left the office earlier than usual and drove across the city to visit one of Reed Global's after-school community programs. She told herself she was conducting a routine inspection. Technically, that was true. The fact that Daniel volunteered there every Tuesday afternoon was merely a coincidence. At least that was what she told herself. The recreation center sat between a public park and an elementary school. Children's laughter echoed from a nearby basketball court. The smell of fresh grass drifted through the open windows. When Madison stepped inside, several staff members greeted her warmly. Then she saw him. Daniel sat at a folding table surrounded by 6 children struggling through math homework. One little boy looked frustrated. I cannot do it. Daniel smiled. You can. You just cannot do it yet. That is different. Very different. The children laughed. Daniel grabbed a pencil and patiently worked through the problem beside him. No speeches. No lectures. No desire to impress anyone. Just patience. Madison stood quietly near the doorway watching. For nearly 20 minutes, Daniel never once looked at his phone. He never checked the time. He never acted as though helping the children was an obligation. Every child received his full attention. Eventually, one of the program directors noticed Madison. You are early today. Apparently. The director followed her gaze and smiled knowingly. Daniel is here every week. Madison nodded. He seems popular. That is because he listens. The director shrugged. You would be surprised how rare that is. Across the room, Daniel helped a little girl solve a difficult problem. Her face immediately lit up with pride. Daniel celebrated her success as though she had won an Olympic medal. The smile that followed reached his eyes. Madison felt something unexpected shift inside her. For years she had admired achievement, ambition, success, results. Yet standing there watching Daniel, she realized she was witnessing a different kind of accomplishment, one that never appeared in annual reports, one that could not be measured by revenue or market share. And somehow, that realization made it even more valuable. Madison told herself she was only interested because Daniel was different. That explanation sounded reasonable during the drive back to her office. It sounded reasonable while reviewing reports. It even sounded reasonable when she found herself checking the community program schedule 2 days later. Yet deep down, she knew the truth was more complicated. Daniel's answer at the gala had not impressed her because it was clever. It stayed with her because it revealed a set of priorities she rarely encountered. The following Saturday morning, Seattle woke beneath a blanket of gray clouds. A light mist drifted through the city, turning sidewalks silver and softening the edges of distant buildings. Madison had planned to spend the day catching up on work. Instead, she found herself walking through Green Lake Park carrying a cup of coffee. The decision felt spontaneous, though part of her suspected otherwise. Halfway around the lake, she saw them, Daniel and Harper. Harper raced ahead on a rented bicycle, while Daniel followed on foot carrying a backpack and a water bottle. Neither seemed aware of the expensive homes surrounding the park or the successful professionals jogging past them. They looked completely content. Harper suddenly stopped near a food cart. Daniel caught up a moment later. "Dad, can we get pretzels?" Daniel glanced toward the price board and smiled. "That depends." Harper groaned dramatically. "On what?" "On whether your father is secretly a billionaire." Harper laughed. "You are definitely not a billionaire." That is a surprisingly accurate observation. Madison could not help smiling. She remained far enough away to avoid interrupting them, yet close enough to notice something else. Daniel listened carefully every time Harper spoke. Not occasionally. Every time. Her opinions mattered. Her stories mattered. Her jokes mattered. A few minutes later, Harper spotted a younger child struggling to carry a box of donated books near a community booth. Before anyone asked, Daniel walked over and offered help. The child's mother thanked him. Daniel shrugged as though it were the most natural thing in the world. Then he returned to Harper without expecting recognition. Madison watched the interaction unfold. She had spent years around people who measured every action according to what they might gain from it. Networking, visibility, influence. Even generosity sometimes came attached to a strategy. Daniel seemed to operate by an entirely different set of rules. As she stood there, her phone vibrated. An executive assistant was calling about an urgent meeting. Madison looked at the screen. Then she looked back at Daniel and Harper sharing a pretzel beside the lake. "Move the meeting to Monday," she said. The assistant sounded surprised. "Are you sure?" Madison stared across the water. "Yes." After ending the call, she slipped the phone into her purse. For the first time in a very long time, she chose not to spend her Saturday chasing another achievement. Instead, she found herself wondering a much more personal question. If a man like Daniel Carter could find peace without constantly pursuing more, what exactly had she been chasing all these years? The following week brought a steady rhythm of ordinary life, and somehow that was exactly what fascinated Madison Reed the most. She had spent years surrounded by extraordinary resumes, ambitious plans, and people constantly trying to prove their value. Daniel Carter never seemed interested in proving anything. He simply showed up. One rainy Thursday afternoon, Madison attended a small community appreciation event sponsored by Reed Global. The gathering was modest compared to the galas and corporate functions she usually attended. Folding chairs filled a recreation hall. Children displayed artwork along the walls. Volunteers served coffee and homemade cookies near the entrance. Madison arrived expecting a brief appearance before returning to work. Instead, she found herself watching Daniel again. Harper sat at a table covered with science fair materials, while Daniel helped her build a display board. Colored markers, photographs, and handwritten notes were spread across the table. "Dad, that title is crooked." Daniel stepped back and studied it. "You are right. It is very crooked. I was testing whether you were paying attention." Harper laughed. "Nice try." Daniel adjusted the display carefully until Harper nodded with approval. The interaction lasted less than a minute, yet Madison noticed something important. Daniel never treated fatherhood like an obligation. He treated it like a privilege. Nearby, another volunteer struggled to carry several heavy storage boxes. Before anyone asked, Daniel walked over and helped. 5 minutes later, he was fixing a loose table leg. 10 minutes after that, he was helping clean spilled juice from the floor. Every time a problem appeared, Daniel quietly solved it. Every time someone thanked him, he acted as though they were doing him a favor. "He is always like that," said an older volunteer, standing beside Madison. She turned. "You know him well?" The woman smiled. "About 7 years. Was he always this involved?" "Even more when Harper was younger." The volunteer looked across the room toward Daniel. After his wife passed away, he could have withdrawn from the world. Instead, he spent more time helping other people. Madison felt her chest tighten slightly. She remembered the brief mention of Harper's mother during the gala. Daniel never used loss to gain sympathy. He never spoke about hardship unless someone asked directly. Yet suddenly many things made sense. The volunteer continued. "You know what amazes me?" Madison shook her head. "He never acts like he sacrificed anything." Across the room, Harper proudly showed her completed project to a group of children. Daniel watched her with a smile that seemed brighter than anything else in the building. Not pride in himself. Pride in her. Pure and uncomplicated. Madison followed his gaze. At that moment, she finally understood what had left her speechless that night. It was not his answer. It was the fact that he meant every word. So many people claimed family came first. Daniel built his entire life around proving it. The event ended as evening rain tapped softly against the windows. Parents gathered children. Volunteers stacked chairs. Harper ran toward Daniel carrying her project board. "Ready to go home?" she asked. Daniel smiled. "Always." Madison watched them leave together through the glass entrance doors. Father and daughter disappearing into the Seattle rain. And for the first time in many years, a woman who had achieved almost everything she once dreamed of realized she might have been overlooking one of the most important things in life. 2 weeks later, the answer Madison Reed had been searching for finally arrived, though not in the way she expected. It happened on an ordinary Tuesday evening. Seattle's skies were painted with streaks of orange and blue as the sun disappeared behind the skyline. The community center was nearly empty. Most of the children had already gone home. Volunteers folded tables and turned off lights one room at a time. Madison had stopped by after work to review plans for an upcoming youth mentorship program. Daniel was there helping clean up. Harper sat nearby finishing homework while quietly humming to herself. For a while, everything felt routine. Then Harper packed her books into her backpack and walked outside to wait near the parking lot. Daniel watched through the window until he was sure she was safe. Madison noticed immediately. "You always do that." Daniel looked over. "Do what?" "Watch until she is completely okay." A small smile appeared on his face. "That is part of the job." Madison laughed softly. "You make it sound simple." Daniel placed several chairs against the wall. "The important things usually are." For a moment, neither spoke. The room felt unusually quiet. The last volunteer waved goodbye and left. Suddenly, they were alone. Madison leaned against the table and looked at him. "Can I ask you something?" Daniel nodded. "Of course." She hesitated. "That night at the gala." Daniel smiled knowingly. "The dangerous question?" "The dangerous answer." He laughed quietly. Madison's expression grew serious. "You said every free hour belonged to someone more important." Daniel nodded. "Yes." Was that really the reason? The smile faded from his face, but not because he was uncomfortable. It was the expression of someone revisiting an old memory with care. He glanced through the window toward Harper. Then he took a slow breath. "Partly." Madison waited. Daniel rested one hand on the back of a chair. "After Emily died, people kept telling me I should move on." His voice remained calm. "They meant well." Madison listened carefully. "But every time I looked at Harper, I realized she was carrying a loss too." Outside, a gentle evening breeze moved through the trees. The parking lot lights flickered on one by one. Daniel continued. "For a long time, I felt like she needed stability more than I needed companionship." Madison lowered her eyes. There was no self-pity in his voice. No bitterness. Only honesty. "Did you ever regret it?" she asked. Daniel looked out the window again. Harper was laughing at something on her phone. The sound drifted faintly through the glass. A smile returned to his face. "Not once." Madison felt something tighten in her chest. Daniel was not describing sacrifice. He was describing love. There was a difference. He continued softly. People assume I gave something up. He shook his head. The truth is, I got the best years of my daughter's life. Silence settled between them. Warm, thoughtful, real. Madison realized she had spent years measuring success by growth, achievement, and progress. Daniel measured it by moments. Homework at the kitchen table. Walks through the park. Science projects. Ordinary days that became priceless because they were shared. And standing there beneath the soft lights of an almost empty community center, Madison finally understood why his answer had stayed with her for so long. It was not about dating at all. It was about knowing exactly what mattered most. Madison Reed had spent most of her adult life convincing herself that loneliness was simply the price of success. The belief had become so familiar that she rarely questioned it anymore. Build the company. Expand the mission. Solve the next challenge. Repeat. Somewhere along the way, she stopped expecting anything different. Yet after her conversation with Daniel, that certainty began to crack. 3 days later, she found herself sitting alone in her office long after sunset. The city lights shimmered beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows. Most employees had gone home hours earlier. A stack of reports sat untouched on her desk. Instead, she stared at an old photograph tucked inside a drawer she rarely opened. The picture showed a younger version of herself standing beside a man named Ryan. They had met during the early years of her career. He was kind, patient, honest. For a while, she believed they might build a future together. Then life happened. Long hours became longer. Ambition consumed more space. Opportunities demanded sacrifices. Eventually, the relationship faded beneath the weight of priorities that always seemed urgent. Ryan moved away. Madison moved forward. At least that was the story she told everyone. The truth was more complicated. The truth was that losing someone good had frightened her more than failing in business ever could. Her phone buzzed. A message from her assistant reminded her about an executive dinner the following evening. Madison looked at the screen before setting the phone aside. For once, she was tired of discussing growth projections and acquisition strategies. She was tired of pretending everything important could be measured. The next afternoon, she visited the community center again. Officially, she was reviewing program budgets. Unofficially, she hoped to see Daniel. The building was unusually quiet. A youth art workshop had just ended. Paintings covered several tables. Harper sat near the window sketching in a notebook while Daniel cleaned brushes at a nearby sink. He looked up when Madison entered. Back again, she smiled. People are starting to suspect I actually care about these programs. Daniel laughed. That would be terrible for your reputation. Harper looked up from her drawing. I think she likes it here. Madison pointed toward her. Your daughter is surprisingly observant. That is because she inherited all the good qualities. Harper grinned. Finally, an honest answer. The three shared a laugh. The moment felt easy, natural, comfortable in a way Madison had not expected. After Harper stepped outside to call a friend, silence settled over the room. Daniel noticed her expression immediately. Everything okay? Madison hesitated. Then she surprised herself. Can I tell you something? Daniel nodded. Of course. She looked down at the paintbrush resting in her hand. People assume I chose my career over relationships. Daniel listened quietly. The truth is, I stopped trusting them. He said nothing. He did not rush to offer advice. He simply listened. Madison swallowed hard. It became easier to focus on work than risk being disappointed again. Sunlight streamed through the windows, casting long shadows across the empty room. Daniel finally spoke. That sounds lonely. Madison laughed softly. Not because it was funny, because it was true. And for the first time in years, she admitted it out loud. The strange thing was that instead of feeling weaker, she felt lighter. As though honesty itself had become the first step towards something she had been missing for a very long time. The conversation should have ended there, but neither Daniel nor Madison seemed eager to leave. Outside, the late afternoon sun had begun its slow descent, casting a warm glow across the community center parking lot. Children laughed in the distance. A school bus rolled past the intersection. Ordinary sounds filled the silence between them. Yet something had changed. The distance that once existed between a powerful CEO and a quiet single father no longer felt quite so large. Daniel placed the last paintbrush into a storage bin and leaned against the counter. Can I tell you something? Madison smiled faintly. That depends. Is it another answer that is going to leave me thinking about it for 2 weeks? Daniel laughed. Possibly. She folded her arms. Go ahead. For a moment, he seemed to choose his words carefully. I think people spend too much time trying to become who they think they should be. Madison listened, and not enough time becoming who they already are. The simplicity of the statement caught her off guard. Daniel continued. You know, when Emily died, everybody had advice. His voice remained calm. Some people thought I should move away. Others thought I should start over immediately. Everyone had a plan for my life. Madison nodded slowly. What did you do? Daniel smiled. I made pancakes. She blinked. Pancakes? For Harper? Madison laughed. That was your big life decision. Pretty much. He shrugged. The next morning, she needed breakfast. The next day, she needed help with homework. The day after that, she needed someone at a school concert. He glanced toward the window. Life kept showing up one day at a time. Madison felt herself smiling. And somehow you make that sound profound. It is not profound, Daniel replied. It is just true. The room grew quiet again. For years, Madison had approached life like a series of mountains to climb. Bigger goals, bigger challenges, bigger accomplishments. Daniel approached it differently. One conversation, one promise, one day. Somehow his version seemed harder and wiser at the same time. Harper suddenly appeared at the doorway. Dad, yes. My friend says her science project is better than mine. Daniel smiled immediately. That sounds serious. Very serious. Madison watched as Daniel walked over and crouched beside his daughter. Do you like your project? Harper nodded. Yes. Did you work hard on it? Yes. Then I think you are doing fine. Harper grinned. That is exactly what I thought. She hurried back outside. Daniel stood and looked toward Madison. See what? Another crisis successfully resolved. Madison laughed harder than she had in weeks. Not the polite laugh she used at networking events. A real laugh. The kind that surprised her. Daniel smiled. There it is. What? You seem lighter when you do that. The comment lingered in the air. Madison looked away for a moment. Nobody had said something like that to her in a very long time. Not because people were unkind, because very few people actually noticed. And standing there in a nearly empty community center, she realized that Daniel Carter had done something no executive, investor, or admirer had managed to do in years. He had stopped seeing the CEO. He was simply seeing her. The following Saturday arrived with clear skies and the kind of sunshine Seattle residents appreciated because it never seemed guaranteed. The community center hosted its annual youth showcase, and families filled the outdoor courtyard with folding chairs, homemade banners, and excited conversations. Children displayed science projects, artwork, and volunteer achievements from the past year. Harper stood proudly beside her presentation board, greeting visitors with the confidence of someone who had worked hard and knew it. Daniel stayed a few steps behind, content to let her enjoy the moment. Madison arrived shortly after the event began. For once, she was not accompanied by assistants, schedules, or a list of meetings waiting for her attention. She wore a simple white outfit and carried nothing except a small notebook. When Harper spotted her, she waved enthusiastically. You came. Madison smiled. I said I would. Most adults say that, and then get busy. Daniel laughed quietly. She has a point. Madison looked at him. Then I am glad I showed up. The morning passed easily. Parents chatted. Children laughed. Volunteers shared stories. At one point, Harper proudly explained her project to Madison for nearly 15 straight minutes. Neither Daniel nor Madison interrupted. They simply listened. Later, as the event began winding down, the program director stepped onto a small platform to thank everyone for their support. Several volunteers received recognition. Donations were acknowledged. Community leaders were applauded. Then the director smiled and looked toward Daniel. There is one person who never lets us thank him properly. Daniel immediately shook his head. Please do not. The crowd laughed. The director continued anyway. For years he has volunteered his time, mentored children, fixed broken equipment, carried boxes, cleaned rooms, and shown up whenever someone needed help. Applause spread through the audience. Daniel looked slightly embarrassed. Harper, however, looked delighted. That is my dad, she announced proudly. More applause followed. Daniel glanced toward Madison. She was smiling, but there were tears in her eyes. Not because of the recognition, because she finally understood something important. The qualities she admired most about Daniel were not extraordinary acts. They were ordinary acts repeated consistently with love, dignity, and grace. After the event ended, families slowly drifted home. The courtyard grew quieter. Harper ran ahead to help load supplies into a storage room. For a moment, Daniel and Madison stood alone beneath the afternoon sunlight. "You know," Madison said softly, "I asked a question a few weeks ago that I thought was funny." Daniel smiled. "I remember." She laughed. "I think I learned more from the answer than I expected." Daniel looked toward Harper. "Life has a way of doing that." Madison nodded. Then she took a slow breath. "Maybe we both spent a long time looking backward." Daniel considered that for a moment. "Maybe. And maybe," she continued, "there is nothing wrong with looking forward once in a while." The smile that appeared on Daniel's face was small, genuine, and full of quiet understanding. No promises were made. No dramatic declarations filled the air. None were needed. Nearby, Harper called for her father. Daniel turned toward the sound, then looked back at Madison. The future remained unwritten. But for the first time in years, neither of them seemed afraid of that. As sunlight settled across the courtyard and laughter echoed in the distance, two people who had spent years carrying different kinds of loneliness discovered something simple and rare. Respect had become understanding. Understanding had become hope. And sometimes, hope is where every second chance begins.